Okay, so in this class, we will study about the structure of atoms. Okay, structure of atoms. Now, while we are trying to understand the structure of an atom, the first basic thing that we need to know, one of the most important thing is, let us write it in the form of a question, is Bohr-Bury rules. Okay, so let us write here. What is Bohr, B-O-H-R, Bury? So these are two scientists, okay, Bohr and Bury. They give us a set of rules that will help us to understand in a big way, okay, what the structure of an atom looks like, or how should we draw an representative structure of an atom. Okay, so the important rules of these Bohr-Bury rules are, okay, so you can write down, just write along with me everything. Okay, okay, so what do we do is we can say here, this Bohr-Bury rule especially tells us how electrons are arranged. That means where we would find electrons in an atom, and second, how they are arranged is told by Bohr-Bury rule. So Bohr-Bury rules tells us, let's just write in simple English, tells us about the electronic configuration of an atom, or for that matter any atom. So the word here, electronic configuration, is a technical term, but in simple meaning it simply means electronic configuration. In simple terms means where are electrons found and how are they arranged in an atom. That is called electronic configuration. So then you can write down the rules. Okay, important rules in the electronic configuration are, let's put it point wise. Point number one. Okay, point number one. The maximum number of electrons. Okay, electrons fill up the lowest energy level first. So this is the first Bohr-Bury rule. Electrons, okay, fill up. Electrons fill up the lowest. Just write it down. We will explain in a simpler way as we go on. Electrons fill up the lowest energy levels first. So to understand this, let us take examples in the next class and you'll just understand it. They are not difficult, okay, but the best way to understand Bohr-Bury rule is just to write down the rules and then understand the points of the rules by specific examples. Then it becomes easy to understand. So second one is the maximum number of electrons in an orbit or shell. Okay, the maximum number of electrons in an orbit, okay, an orbit, or we can call it as well as shell, okay, or shell, is given by this formula. Okay, is given by the formula twice, means 2 multiplied to n square, where we need to explain what this n is. Okay, where n, okay, represents, is the number of the orbit, is the number of the orbit. Now, what does this mean? Example. Number of orbit here means first orbit is called number 1, second orbit will be given number 2. So that is what is meant by number of orbit. So let us understand this by an example. Example. For first orbit, for the first orbit in an atom, so we now know that electrons are going to be found moving in orbits. Okay, for the first orbit, okay, n equal to 1, that's what it means, where, so comma, maximum number of electrons, and let us represent the electrons by, can be represented by small e, will be 2n square. So let's write down 2 into the rule here is n square. So n for first orbit, n is 1 because it's the first orbit, so 1 square. So according to second rule, in the first orbit maximum number of electrons is 2, so it cannot be more than 2, that means. And then for second orbit likewise, n will be equal to 2, and therefore maximum number of electrons will be 2, and n is second orbit means n is 2, so 2 n square, so 2 square, so 2 square is 4, right? 4 2s are right. So the maximum number of electrons that can be accommodated in the second shell is not more than 8. In other words, it means there can be no such atom where in the second orbit there are 9 electrons, 10 electrons. No, maximum is 8. Okay, there can be lower than that. 7 is possible because lesser than the maximum is possible. 6, but not beyond 8. No atom will have more than 8 electrons in the second shell. That's what is meant by the second rule of Bohr-Bury is telling us. Okay, so and one more we can go for the third orbit or shell. Third means n will be there for 3. Maximum number of electrons will be third, n is 3, so 2n square. So 3 square is 9, 9 2s are 18. So according to second rule, first shell orbit can have maximum 2 electrons, second can have 8, and third can have maximum 18 electrons. That's what is meant by the second rule. And the third rule, okay, the third rule, okay, the outermost orbit cannot have more than 8 electrons in any atom. That means the outsidemost, or in other words, outermost. Okay, the outermost orbit or shell orbit cannot have more than 8 electrons. No atom in its outermost orbit can accommodate more than 8. The outsidemost orbit means first orbit, second orbit, third orbit. If third orbit is the last orbit of a particular atom, the third orbit, which is the outermost orbit, cannot accommodate more than 8 electrons. That's what it means. But this is important. This is where many people get confused, so listen carefully. The next point, even if it can accommodate, even if it can accommodate, okay, even if it can accommodate more than 8, okay, even if it can accommodate more than 8, that means more than 8 according to rule 2. Here, look at rule 2. For example, according to rule 2, the third orbit can have maximum 18, right? So what this rule is saying is that the outermost orbit cannot have more than 8. Okay, even though rule number 2 may be saying, for example, third orbit can have maximum 18, that's correct. But if the atom is such that the outermost orbit, first, second, and third orbit you can have 18, but if the outermost orbit is the third orbit, more than 8 cannot go. That means, in other words, the rule number 3 is more superior to rule number 2. That means even if according to rule 2, third orbit can have 18 electrons, if the third orbit of that atom is the outermost orbit, it cannot accommodate 18. It has to accommodate 8. In other words, like there are rules, okay, rules like there are 2 rules, but both are correct. But when it is a matter of which is more powerful or which is more dominant rule, means we have to always apply rule 3 first, and only after applying satisfying rule 3, if rule 2 can be satisfied within rule 3, then that's fine. But if we cannot satisfy rule 2 at the expense of rule 3, that means because rule 2 is saying third shell can have 18 electrons, so we cannot just put 18 according to rule 2. If the third orbit is the last orbit, then it has to obey the third rule rather than the second rule. That's what it means. But if both are possible, then that's fine. But if it's a matter of a scenario where the last orbit is the third orbit and the second rule is saying third orbit can accommodate 18, see here according to rule, but rule number 3 will say, but according to my rule 3, if third orbit is the last orbit or the outermost orbit cannot have more than 8. So my rule is more superior to rule 2. So rule 2 will be applied first, and rule 3 will be applied first, and rule 2 has to be applied under the condition of rule 3. Okay, that's what it means. One more point in Bohr-Bury rule. There are 4 rules, 4 Bohr-Bury rules. Okay, first rule is electrons fill up the lowest energy level first. Second rule is maximum number of electrons that can go in a particular orbit is given by the formula 2n square. The third rule is the outermost orbit of any atom cannot accommodate more than 8 electrons. Okay, even if it can accommodate more than 8 according to rule 2, the outermost can never accommodate more than 8. We have to make sure that the fourth one is the penultimate. The word here penultimate means last second, outermost, just before the outermost. If this is the first orbit, second orbit, third orbit, so there are 3 orbits only, then 1, 2, 3, then third orbit is the outermost orbit. The one just before the outermost, in this case second, is called penultimate. So second one will be the penultimate orbit. If we have here fourth one, then the third one, which is the last second, will be penultimate. Simply means last second. Okay, so the penultimate orbit. Okay, the penultimate orbit or shell cannot have or accommodate more than 18 electrons. The last orbit cannot have more than 8 electrons. The penultimate orbit cannot have more than 18 electrons. Okay, even if it can accommodate, even if it can accommodate more according to rule 2. So according to rule 2, even a particular orbit may be able to accommodate more than, a particular penultimate orbit may be able to accommodate more than 18. But even if that is so, we cannot put more than 18 in the last second, means penultimate orbit, in any method. That means rule 4 is more dominant than rule 2. Rule 3 is also more dominant than, rule 3 is more dominant than rule 2 in the case of outermost orbit. Rule 4 is more powerful or dominant than rule 2 in terms of the penultimate orbit, or in the case of penultimate orbit. Okay, these are the 4 rules, only 4 rules. So if we know the Bohr-Bury rule and understand it, we can arrange the electrons of any atom in the right orbits, the right number. Bohr-Bury rule, in other words, is the rule that helps us to arrange the electrons in an atom in the right places, in the right number of electrons. Okay, so we have done this one. Now, as I said, the best way is we have written it just like that. Now, the best way to understand Bohr-Bury rule properly and easily is to take specific examples. Then, at that time, we'll begin to understand it better. We'll continue, okay, in the next class.